I should have known better than to ever trust my sister's taste in men. The glass of champagne in front of me had gone flat more than 20 minutes earlier, the last bubbles dissolving the way my fragile hope for a warm evening had dissolved with them. Carter, the man my sister had sworn up and down was a perfect match for me, sat across the table, glued to his phone with the kind of bored detachment people usually reserve for doctors' waiting rooms. "Emily," he said without even looking up. "I'll be blunt. My senior manager arranged this through your sister, because apparently I need to look more socially active during the holiday season." He finally lifted his face, his expression so blank it almost didn't seem human, not a hint of embarrassment in sight. "You're cute, but I already have a girlfriend." "Well, not exactly. It's complicated. Anyway, this wasn't supposed to be a real date." I let out a hollow laugh, the kind someone gives when they know they've just wasted 3 precious hours of their life. In the upscale Manhattan restaurant, beneath soft amber lights and gentle jazz, I felt painfully out of place. The blue dress I had chosen tonight, the one I used to call my lucky dress, felt suddenly ridiculous. I swallowed what was left of my pride, set my napkin down, and stood to leave, offering a polite goodbye out of instinct even though Carter was already back to scrolling as if I had never existed at all. Outside, the December wind cut across my skin like the edge of a cold blade, thin snow beginning to settle on the stone pavement. I walked quickly, my heels echoing sharp and lonely against the ground, arms wrapped tight around myself, unsure whether I was shaking from the cold or from the humiliation. The city around me still glowed, still buzzed with holiday brightness, but to me it looked like a blurred painting I could no longer step into. I did not cry. I had grown used to hoping and then being disappointed, used to empty promises, used to the dull ache of being treated like a temporary option on someone else's list. And the most absurd part was that all I had wanted was a decent evening, a meaningful conversation, someone with enough courtesy to listen. I tightened my grip on my umbrella and walked into the square where Christmas lights shimmered over lavishly decorated storefronts. Just as I was about to cross the street to hail a cab, a movement at the edge of my vision made me pause. A little boy, no more than 6, wearing a red coat, stood alone near the curb, his eyes wide with fear, his lips trembling. People streamed past him without a glance. I frowned, something deep inside warning me that something was off. Then a tall man with his hat pulled low over his face moved quickly toward the child. My heart stumbled. I didn't have time to think. My heart kicked hard against my ribs when the boy's eyes met mine. In that brief moment, surrounded by bright lights and the noise of Manhattan streets, I saw pure fear etched into his gaze. He wasn't crying, but the slight tremor in his eyes and the tight press of his lips made my chest ache. He stood far too close to the edge of the street for a child his age, and no adult was anywhere near him. I walked faster, still gripping my umbrella like some kind of instinctive anchor. The tall man kept approaching, his stride hurried but off somehow, his head down, his hands buried in the pockets of a long silver-gray coat. His black shoes struck the wet pavement in steady, unsettling beats. I looked around, but no one seemed to notice. It felt as if, in the rush of a winter night, only the boy and I remained still, while the rest of the world sped past in its usual indifference. The boy stepped back when the man got closer, glancing to the sides as if searching for an escape. I didn't wait. 1 step, then 2, then I was nearly running. I slipped between them, raising my arm and my umbrella as a shield. The man stopped, lifted his head, and stared at me with cold, flat eyes. "Who are you?" to the kid, he asked, his voice low and rough. I had no idea where my steadiness came from, but my voice rose clear above the city noise. "I'm the person who noticed he was scared. Who are you?" He gave a short, humorless laugh, glanced around as if debating something, then abruptly turned and disappeared into the crowd behind a bus that had just pulled up. I spun back to the boy, kneeling to his level. "Are you okay?" He shook his head, then whispered, so softly it felt like a breath. "I got lost. My dad told me to wait in the car, but I saw a dog across the street, and then I couldn't find him." I looked at him more closely. His face was pale, his hands ice cold inside worn blue mittens, his coat embroidered with the name Mason. I exhaled, took his hand gently. "Mason, right? My name is Emily. You're safe now. I'll help you." A horn blared behind us, making me flinch, and at that moment a black SUV rolled to a stop only a few steps away. The door opened, and 2 men in black suits stepped out with urgent, controlled movements. One walked straight toward us. Instinctively, I stepped in front of Mason again, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. The man stopped, eyes sweeping over me before settling on the boy. "Mason, are you hurt?" His voice was deep and steady, not loud, but carrying a force that made you listen. Mason moved toward him but paused, his small hand clutching my coat as if reluctant to let go. "Dad, she helped me." The man, presumably Nathan, nodded at his son before looking at me, his gaze assessing but not unkind. His eyes were a stormy blue-gray, and his face carried something carved from both strength and exhaustion. "I'm Nathan Blackwell. Thank you for noticing him. Can you tell me what happened?" I swallowed, feeling as though I had been pulled into something far beyond what I expected of this disastrous evening. But I explained everything, from the boy's frightened expression to the strange man's behavior and how close Mason had come to being taken if I hadn't stepped in. Nathan listened without interrupting, his face unreadable but his eyes growing darker with every detail. When I finished, Mason was still holding my hand. Nathan glanced at his son, then at me, this time with a longer, heavier look. "Are you driving?" he asked. I shook my head. "I just left a date. I was going to grab a taxi." Nathan nodded once. "You'll ride with us. I'll have someone take you home. At the very least, to make sure you're safe." I hesitated, but Mason looked up at me with a silent plea. I knew I shouldn't agree, but I couldn't walk away, not with my heart still pounding from the way this child had looked at me like someone reaching for protection. I nodded. "All right, but I'm sitting next to Mason." The SUV door had barely begun to close when Mason's sudden scream snapped me around. The suspicious man had not left after all. He lunged out of nowhere, a streak of cold winter air in human form, grabbing Mason's wrist with brutal force. "You're coming with me, kid," he snarled, eyes wild. Everything happened within a single heartbeat. Without thinking, I swung my umbrella, striking his arm with a sharp, metallic crack. He recoiled with a hiss of pain. I yanked Mason behind me, shielding him again, gripping the umbrella like the only weapon I had. The man glared, ready to charge again, but stopped short when a car screeched behind him, tires slicing across the wet pavement. The black SUV had braked hard, its doors flying open. Two men in black rushed out like shadows. One tackled the stranger to the ground in a swift, practiced movement that left me staring. The other headed for us. But before he reached us, a third man stepped out of the vehicle, moving slowly yet with unmistakable authority. Streetlights reflected off his long black coat, his dark hair slicked back, his face angular and cold as stone. His blue-gray eyes locked onto Mason and then onto me, and something in that gaze stole a breath straight from my lungs. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low and thick, heavy enough to still the air. Mason didn't speak. He simply backed into him, but he didn't release my hand, as if clinging to both of us at once. I glanced at the man pinned to the ground, his face twisted in anger and pain, muttering something in a language I couldn't understand. The newcomer Nathan looked at Mason again before finally turning to me. "I'm Nathan Blackwell, Mason's father. Thank you for stepping in." My nerves hadn't settled. My voice trembled despite my effort to stay composed. He tried to take him. I don't know what happened. I just saw he was terrified and I swallowed hard, loosening my grip on the umbrella only slightly. Nathan nodded and signaled to his men. One of them pulled the stranger off the ground, handcuffed him with a set of cuffs I had never seen before, and escorted him toward another vehicle that had just arrived. No police, no sirens. Everything happened with a swiftness and discretion that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Who is he?" I asked. Nathan didn't answer immediately. He knelt slightly, placing a hand on Mason's shoulder as if grounding himself in the reality that his son was safe. Mason nodded faintly, then looked at me. "She's the only one who helped me, Dad." I met Nathan's eyes for the first time fully. In them, I saw not just cool detachment, but something else entirely. A storm held tight, a grief unspoken. "We've been tracking him," Nathan said quietly, "but we didn't expect him to act this recklessly, or that my son would be protected by a stranger willing to risk her life." Reality finally caught up with me. My head felt light, my knees unsteady, emotion, adrenaline, and the truth that I had just stopped a kidnapping tangled together in my throat. "Thank you is not enough," Nathan murmured before turning to his men. "Take her and Mason back to the estate. I'll follow in the next car." I froze. "Wait, I was just heading home. I don't need—" "You stepped in for my son. I won't leave you alone on the street like this. Please." His tone wasn't forceful, but it left little room for refusal. I looked at Mason, still clutching my hand like a lifeline. Part of me wanted to step back, to protect my boundaries, but another part understood that tonight had moved far beyond anything ordinary, And if my instinct had led me into this moment, perhaps it was leading me somewhere I wasn't meant to walk away from just yet. I nodded. All right, but I'll decide when I leave. Nathan inclined his head. That's all I ask. If you're still listening, and something in this story has stirred a place inside your own heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, so we have the strength to keep bringing more heartfelt stories every single day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment and let us know what corner of the world this story has reached. We're grateful for every word you share. The SUV rolled slowly down the avenue, city lights drifting across the tinted windows like floating constellations. I sat in the back seat, Mason beside me, his head resting lightly against my arm, while Nathan sat across from us, his sharp gaze never leaving me for even a second. The air inside the car felt dense with silence. The two guards in the front seat did not say a word, as if every breath and movement had been pressed into an invisible tension. Miss Emily, Nathan finally said, his voice low and steady, carrying caution beneath its clarity. I know you helped my son, and I am genuinely grateful, but I need to understand a few things. I clasped my hands tightly in my lap, feeling each anxious heartbeat echo through my chest. I understand. Go ahead. Nathan nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly as if examining every flicker of expression on my face. Did you just happen to walk by? Or were you watching beforehand? Heat rushed to my cheeks. I had just left a terrible date, I replied, keeping my voice even, and I saw Mason standing alone near the street. A strange man was approaching him. You don't need to be a detective to know something was wrong. Nathan remained silent for a moment, then tilted his head toward Mason. Tell me again, who approached you first? This woman? Or the man? Mason lifted his head, nodding quickly. She did. Miss Emily came first. I saw that man following me, and I got scared, so I stepped back, and she stood in front of me. I could not tell what Nathan was thinking, but something in his gaze softened, just slightly. Still, the air of control and suspicion clung to him like a second skin. He signaled for the driver to slow down. Can we confirm Miss Emily's home address? The guard in the front seat turned his head. Already checked. Valid address. She lives alone, works at a design firm downtown, no criminal record, no questionable affiliations. Nathan looked at me again, and this time there was something layered beneath his stare. What is your profession? Architect. I specialize in urban design. An architect? Conveniently present the moment my son was in danger, he said, as though calculating the probability of such a coincidence. I already told you. If I hadn't reacted, your son might have been taken. My voice wavered, the composure slipping. You can paint me however you want, but don't talk as if I orchestrated what happened. Mason tightened his grip on my hand, his voice small but steady as he whispered, She is not bad, Dad. His words seemed to carve through the heavy silence. Nathan leaned back, his eyes lingering on his son before turning to me. All right, I am not questioning your intentions, but in my world, coincidences rarely mean nothing. I did not respond. I did not know what world he lived in, but from his manner of speaking, the guarded eyes, the presence of two trained men, it was clearly not a world I had ever brushed against. The car pulled up in front of an old apartment building along a quiet, tree-lined street. I reached for the door, but Mason grabbed my hand suddenly. Can you stay? I looked down and met those pleading, earnest eyes once more. My throat tightened. Before I could answer, Nathan spoke. Miss Emily, my son has not had an easy year. His mother died in an accident, and he does not trust people easily anymore. But today, he held on to you as if you were the last piece of land in a storm. I froze. Part of me wanted to step out, return to the quiet safety of my apartment, and walk away from trouble. But another part whispered that if I left now, I would be abandoning a child to the dark once again. I looked at Mason, then at Nathan. I will not stay long, but I will come in, just to make sure Mason is okay. Nathan nodded, and for the first time, there was warmth in his gaze. That is more than enough. Inside the SUV, the atmosphere softened as Mason sat nestled between us, still holding my hand as though afraid the moment would dissolve if he let go. He was quiet, but his eyes no longer carried that sharp edge of fear. Instead, they flicked between me and his father as if searching for a bridge, uniting the two people he now trusted most. Nathan leaned back, slipping off his leather gloves, revealing work-worn hands lined with sinews and sun-darkened skin. He did not look like a father who shied from responsibility, yet something about him suggested he held himself at a distance from his son, and from me. At last he spoke. "You work at an architecture firm, correct?" I nodded. "Yes. I design urban landscapes and occasionally help with industrial revitalization projects." He was quiet for a moment, as though turning something over in his mind. "I run a logistics company, mostly supply chain management and freight operations for the eastern ports." I looked at him, mildly surprised. "That sounds large." He nodded, acknowledging without bragging. "My family started with small shipping routes out of Brooklyn in my grandfather's time. Then we expanded into New Jersey, and eventually the southern ports. Now we operate in 6 states with more than 200 employees." I glanced at him again. There was something steady and deliberate in the way he spoke, a subtle blend of confidence and restraint. He was not a man who wasted words. "And you're expanding further?" I asked. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing my angle. "You could say that. I am rebuilding old systems, integrating updated security technology into daily operations. Security becomes non-negotiable when your family is affected," I murmured, glancing at Mason, who was now leaning his head against my shoulder. "Exactly." His answer was short but weighted. I did not ask more. I sensed boundaries he would not cross, places he would not let me follow, whether because I was a stranger or because, in his world, disclosure was a kind of vulnerability. In the quiet moment that followed, Mason looked up at me, his voice barely more than breath. "Miss Emily, can you stay for dinner?" I smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. "I am not sure your father would approve." Nathan looked at me then, and his eyes softened again. "If you do not mind, I think Mason would like that." I exhaled slowly, feeling myself cross a thin, delicate line between distance and closeness. I did not yet understand the world I was stepping into, but I knew this night would not be one I simply walked away from. The SUV turned down a private road flanked by bare winter trees stretching their shadows across the stone path. The iron gate opened with mechanical slowness, revealing a mansion hazed with drifting fog. My heart tightened not out of fear, but because something deep inside whispered that this place would not be merely a temporary stop. When the SUV finally pulled up to the old building where I lived, it was close to midnight. Mason had fallen asleep on my shoulder sometime after we left the estate gates. Nathan gently woke him, his gaze softening when he saw those small hands gripping the hem of my coat as though reluctant to let go. I stroked Mason's hair, whispering that he was home safe now, that everything was all right. He rubbed his eyes, whispered a sleepy goodbye, and let me step out of the car. But before I turned away, Nathan said something that made me pause. "If you have time tomorrow, I would like to speak with you privately, to thank you properly." I nodded out of politeness, uncertain whether anything would actually come of it. The night felt like a sweeping wind that had passed through me, blurring the line between what was real and what wasn't. I walked into my apartment, the small room lined with sketches on the walls, the familiar amber kitchen light easing my breath. I made myself a cup of hot tea, sank into my chair, my mind drifting through emotions I could not yet name. I did not know why I had been on that street at that exact moment, why I hadn't turned away, why I had stepped deeper when everything began to unravel, but I did not regret it. The next morning, while I sat in a conference room reviewing plans for a community courtyard in Queens, my assistant stepped in to tell me someone was waiting in the lobby unnamed, but insisting it was a personal matter. I walked out, and unsurprisingly Nathan stood there, dressed in a flawless suit, carrying the same quiet pressure that seemed to bend the air around him. He nodded in greeting, his voice low and composed. "I know you are busy, but I need 5 minutes." I led him into an empty meeting room, closing the door without asking anything. He opened a leather folio and placed a thin file on the table. "This is a project I am developing. I need someone to redesign the entire security system and emergency routes for a new coordination center. After last night, I thought of you." I raised a brow. "Why me?" He did not answer immediately, only looked at me with a gaze I could not decipher. "Because I believe you understand the weight of safety, and because Mason would feel more at ease knowing you were around, at least for a while." His answer startled me. I had not expected him to mention his son before the work itself. I looked through the plans, the data, the layout of the logistics complex he was constructing. The scale was enormous, far beyond anything I had handled. This was work for veteran firms specializing in strategic infrastructure, not an urban architect like me. I closed the file and pushed it gently back toward him. "I do not think I am the right fit, and I cannot accept a job simply because a child trusts me." Nathan showed no reaction, no disappointment. He simply watched me, quietly. "What are you afraid of, Miss Emily? That you will be drawn into something bigger than you anticipated, or that you might start caring too much? I inhaled deeply. I am afraid I will not do well. Afraid I will step into a world I am not prepared for. Afraid of becoming entangled in things beyond my expertise and beyond my emotions. I stood, trying to steady my voice. Thank you for your trust and for the offer, but I have to decline. Nathan nodded, offering no argument, no persuasion. He simply spoke one sentence as he rose to leave. I understand, but if you change your mind, know that the opportunity will still be there, as will Mason. The door closed behind him. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting on the file he had left on the table. I had no idea whether he had forgotten it intentionally or by accident. But a part of me no longer wanted to give it back. I had tried to push away every thought of Mason, of Nathan, of the file that had sat untouched on my desk for 3 long days, but my mind refused to obey. Every time I buried myself in the community playground project, in technical drawings crowded with measurements, or in meetings that dragged on for hours, Mason's image slipped back in the wide brown eyes I had seen that night, the trembling hand that had clung to mine in the freezing dark. I kept reminding myself that I had already said no, that none of this was my responsibility, that Nathan's world was not built for someone like me. Until I saw Mason again during a weekend volunteer shift at Hopebridge, the support center where I taught art therapy once a month to children recovering from trauma. The moment I stepped into the room, I stopped short. There he was, the little boy with the familiar brown hair, sitting quietly in a corner with a blank sheet of paper and an unopened box of crayons in front of him. I walked over and called softly, "Mason." He looked up, startled for a heartbeat before his eyes lit up, as if Christmas lights had flickered on inside him. "Miss Emily." He jumped up, ran to me, wrapped his arms around my waist, pressing his small face against me as though he had found someone he had lost for years. I knelt to meet his eyes. "What are you doing here?" He glanced around and whispered, "They said Dad had a meeting. I do not like staying home with strangers, but here there are friends, so I feel better." I looked toward the doorway and spotted one of Nathan's familiar guards giving me a subtle nod from afar, watchful and silent. I sat beside Mason, opened his crayons, and began the lesson like any other day, though my heart could not settle. For 2 full hours, Mason never strayed far from me. He drew a house with a fence, a yard, a tall figure, and a small child under a tree. I pointed to the drawing. "Is this your home?" Mason shook his head. "This is the place I want to live." "With who?" I asked, unable to meet his eyes. He hesitated, then whispered, "I want to live somewhere someone waits for me to come home. Like you." His words caught in my throat. I left the center that afternoon with my heart heavy and tangled. I drove without direction until, guided by something deeper than reason, I turned toward Nathan's office. The large gate swung open the moment my car approached. No one asked my name. The same guard nodded and led me inside. Nathan stood by a tall window on the 2nd floor, looking out over the harbor, his silhouette sharp and still like a statue chiseled into the winter afternoon. He turned when he heard my footsteps. "Miss Emily." His voice was low and calm. I stayed silent for a long moment before placing the file on his desk. I reviewed it. The project is complex, and the system needs layered structuring to secure both physical and digital safety. I have a few ideas. Surprise flickered in his expression, though he said nothing. I continued. "I will not work full-time. I still have my own job, but I will take the security design portion you proposed. On one condition." Nathan folded his arms, his gaze steady. "Go on." "I need direct access to Mason during the process. I need to understand his environment and his emotional patterns to design solutions that make sense. I do not work from paper alone." Nathan nodded slowly. "Agreed." He paused, then added, "I did not choose you only for your skills. I chose you because I believe Mason needs an anchor, and I am not good at being a soft-spoken father." I nodded, saying nothing. I knew I had crossed into another world, a world of iron gates, coded locks, and handshakes that meant far more than business. Yet I also knew a child had opened a door I could not ignore. And though I did not know what waited ahead, I was ready to step into it. The first days working at Nathan's estate felt like entering an entirely different reality. Everything was controlled by an integrated security network. From the automatic gate that recognized license plates to hidden cameras encrypted with next-generation facial recognition, I spent hours surveying each part of the property, noting blind spots, emergency exits, basement structures, and evacuation routes. Meanwhile, Mason followed me like a small shadow whenever he was free, and Nathan rarely intervened. He kept his distance, polite but cool, appearing only when technical clarification was needed or when approving sketches I submitted. But his eyes were different. I felt it each time I caught him watching me, not as a client assessing work, but as a man quietly observing how I existed in his world and in his son's. Every morning I ate breakfast with Mason in the large kitchen looking out toward the garden. He insisted I take him to school, and Nathan never objected. He simply signaled the driver. On the ride, Mason chattered endlessly about small things, his class project, a dream where he flew across rooftops like a superhero, the Christmas song he was learning for the winter recital. I listened out of habit at first, but soon I realized I was beginning to look forward to these mornings, anchoring myself in the calm sweetness of his voice amid the steel beams and tangled wires of my new work. During the day, I worked with Nathan's technical and security teams, professional, quiet, and never questioning why an architect had been granted direct oversight, likely because they understood one thing. When Nathan chose someone, no one asked why. Whenever I handed him reports, he skimmed them, adjusted a few numbers, and let me proceed. Yet, in our brief exchanges, I realized Nathan understood not only structural systems but human psychology with unsettling precision. He did not need many words. One look from him could make anyone reconsider what they were about to say. One evening, while I was reviewing the underground electrical map beneath the estate, I heard slow footsteps behind me. I did not need to turn to know it was him. "You have not gone home," he said, his voice drifting through the dim room like a thin ribbon of smoke, neither cold nor close. "I have a few points to inspect," I replied. "If I leave it for tomorrow, the team will lay materials over this section, and redesigning will be harder." Nathan stepped closer, the overhead light catching the strands of his hair, casting a muted halo around him. I looked up and met his gaze. Silence stretched between us, softer than before. He said nothing, only set a cup of hot tea beside me. I blinked in surprise. I had not expected him to notice I always chose tea over coffee. "Thank you," I murmured, trying to sound neutral. He watched me a moment longer, then turned away with his usual purposeful stride. But this time, the air did not feel cold. Something unspoken had shifted, as if a hidden corner inside him had opened for a brief second. And in that moment, I realized my work there was no longer just technical duty. I had stepped fully into their world, with both mind and heart. That afternoon the sky turned gray, and a light, misty rain darkened the air with a sharper chill. Nathan and I went together to inspect a technical tunnel beneath one of the new coordination buildings. This was one of the most critical layers of the security design, and as always, Nathan came himself rather than delegating. The entrance sat behind a row of equipment rooms, a single steel door leading to narrow metal stairs already touched with rust. I went first, the flashlight on my hard hat sweeping across the rough concrete walls. Nathan followed close behind, silent as ever, but I could hear his breathing grow heavier the deeper we descended. At the bottom, the air was damp and tight, pipes coiled overhead like tangled veins, and the temporary lights flickered with weak, uneven glow, throwing long shadows across the walls. I turned to ask him a technical question, but a loud crash erupted above us, a sheet of metal dropping, the security lock slamming shut. The sound echoed through the tunnel and froze me in place. I ran back up the steps, pushing against the door, but it was jammed. I tried the radio, nothing, no signal underground. I turned to Nathan. He leaned against the wall, shoulders tense, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the low ceiling. "Nathan, are you okay?" I asked. He nodded slightly but said nothing. I stepped closer and saw the sheen of sweat across his forehead, the way his gaze stayed locked on the cramped ceiling. "You're claustrophobic?" He did not answer, but his breath grew heavier by the second. I spoke softly. "This is just a maintenance tunnel. I will figure out the door. Or someone will notice we lost signal. No one will leave us down here long." Nathan shook his head faintly, his voice raw and low. "I was trapped once, as a child, in a cargo hold, no light, no one came. 3 days. I died and came back. I went still." The confession was sudden and painfully honest. I sat beside him, my hand gently touching his stiff forearm. He did not pull away. "We still have light, we still have air, and I am here. You are not alone." "Not this time." Nathan turned to me, his eyes no longer cold but full of buried hurt and restrained panic. He was fighting for control, even as his body betrayed him. I took a bottle of water from my bag and handed it to him. He drank a small sip, set it down, and I began talking soft, steady, the way one soothes a frightened child. I told him about times I had been locked in storage rooms during architecture school, about getting lost in an abandoned building's maze of hallways and feeling panic close in. Nathan said nothing, but his eyes softened. The space between us shrank, not because the tunnel was narrow, but because we were placing a quiet trust in each other. Time moved slowly underground. Nearly an hour later, the radio crackled to life. The maintenance team had noticed the malfunctioning door and was unlocking it manually. When the stairwell at last filled with brighter light, Nathan was still sitting there, my hand resting on his shoulder, his breathing steady again. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen once before, completely unguarded. "Thank you." Only 2 words, but from a man like him, they meant everything. When we stepped out into open air again, the rain had stopped. I glanced at him, saying nothing. Something had shifted between us, not intimacy, not yet, but understanding. And in his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. A sense of need. Not for my skills, but for my presence. 2 days after the incident in the basement, I continued reviewing the internal security system with a faint sense of unease clinging to me like a cold ribbon of smoke. Something was wrong. The system I had designed, implemented by Nathan's engineering teams, should not have malfunctioned on its own. The metal sheet had fallen at the exact moment we were beneath it. The door had jammed, even though it had been inspected twice beforehand. I began digging deeper into the records. I sat in the temporary site office, spreading the heavy blueprints of the basement renovation across the table. Something about the accident didn't align with the physics of the structure. I cross-referenced the automated maintenance schedule with the building's sensor logs. My finger traced the schematic line for the basement sector. That's when I saw it. The safety sensors on that heavy steel door hadn't malfunctioned. They had been manually bypassed. According to the digital maintenance log, a system override had been authorized 17 minutes before Nathan and I entered the tunnel. It wasn't a glitch. It was a deliberate command to disable the safety stop. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled the authorization ticket for that specific override. In construction, every command leaves a paper trail. The digital signature on the work order wasn't from the security team. It was an executive override code, one used to bypass safety protocols during high-level cargo inspections. I matched the ID code against the company hierarchy chart. It belonged to the director of operations, Dean Blackwell. I had heard that name only once, in a conversation between Mason and Nathan, when Mason had mentioned Uncle Dean with little enthusiasm. Dean was Nathan's half-brother, still holding a portion of the company's shares despite having stepped away from day-to-day leadership. I did not know what their relationship was, but for an ordinary shareholder to retain high-level system access made no sense. I backed up every piece of data, printed the evidence, sealed it in an envelope, and walked straight to Nathan's office without announcing myself. He sat behind his desk, lifting his eyes when I entered, not surprised, not warm, not cold, only watchful. I set the envelope on his desk. He opened it, scanned page after page, his expression darkening by degrees. After a long silence, he set the documents down and asked quietly, "You're certain?" I nodded. The maintenance logs don't lie. Someone used an executive override to disable the safety sensors on that door. That specific command code is assigned to only one person's keycard, Dean's. Nathan leaned back, fingers interlaced, his jaw tight. No one but me could authorize that from inside. He exhaled slowly. Dean could have paid someone, or he did it for personal reasons. I held his gaze. I do not want to assume the worst about your family, but I cannot ignore this. If it was him, it means your entire corporate security network is compromised from within, and not just you. My voice softened. Mason is in danger too. That made Nathan's eyes snap open, the shift sharp as a blade. That was his one vulnerability, and I knew I had struck it. He stood and walked to the window, the pale winter light spreading across his broad, silent back. "I do not want to believe it," he murmured. "Dean saved the company when I inherited it from my father. He is not someone who trusts easily, but he is not reckless, not the kind to sabotage us just to provoke conflict." I stepped closer. "Nathan, I am not here to judge your family. I am here to make sure your son is safe, and right now, this system is not safe. If you still trust me, let me dig deeper. I need higher access and a full record of Dean's entries into the control center over the past 3 months." Nathan turned, nodded once. "You will have everything you need, but do not tell Mason." I nodded. "There's one more thing. If what I uncover is more than a malfunction, if this is a real conspiracy, are you prepared for that?" Nathan's eyes steadied. The wavering had vanished. Only the grave resolve of a man standing before the hardest choice of his life remained. He nodded slowly. I will not let anyone hurt my son, not even if that person is my own brother. That morning the sky hung heavy and gray, like a warning. Nathan and I went to the eastern construction site to inspect the third-floor structure where the central security coordination system would be installed. The engineering team reported material changes and needed a recalculation on load capacity. I carried the updated plans, still marked with notes from our previous survey. Nathan walked close beside me, his eyes sweeping over the workers around us. Though he appeared calm, I could sense the tension simmering inside him, days of pressure, the name Dean resurfacing, suspicions he dared not voice. We had just reached the designated spot when a violent crash erupted overhead. A steel scaffold had come loose and collapsed with terrifying speed. I looked up just in time to see a long beam slicing through the air. Everything happened in an instant. Before I could react, Nathan grabbed me hard and pulled me aside, both of us crashing onto the rough concrete floor. The beam hit the exact place I had been standing less than 2 seconds earlier, slamming into the ground with a brutal, echoing clang. Dust exploded around us, workers shouting in panic. My body ached, but nothing felt broken. Nathan was still on top of me, shielding me with his entire weight, his hands gripping my shoulders as if terrified I would vanish if he loosened his hold. His eyes were wild, his chest rising fast and uneven. I had never seen him lose control. "Emily, are you hurt?" His voice shook, stripped of its usual cold steadiness. I shook my head, breath thready. "I'm fine. What about you?" He did not answer. He rose quickly, scanning the site with the alertness of a cornered animal, every muscle taut. Security rushed toward us, pulling us back from the debris. A foreman shouted that no one was seriously hurt, but the beam's locking mechanism had been altered. Nathan heard it, and his jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed at his temple. I had never seen him like that, furious, wounded, afraid. When he turned to me, his eyes held a mixture of anguish and rage. That was when I noticed the deep scrape across one of his arms, blood soaking through his shirt sleeve. I reached toward it, but he brushed my hand aside. "I'm fine. Get her to the car." We walked away, our steps heavy with the weight of suspicion and emotions that had surged too fast to process. In the car, he sat motionless for a long time. I gently touched the injured arm. He did not flinch. Finally, I whispered, "Do you think it was him, Dean, or someone working for him?" Nathan did not answer right away. His free hand tightened into a fist. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and bitter. "This is no longer a warning. They meant to kill." My breath caught. "But why target me?" Nathan turned, his eyes reddened, his voice rough. "Because you are the weakness they just discovered." I went still, not out of fear, but because it was the first time Nathan admitted I mattered. Not as a consultant, not as an architect, but as a person, someone who had slipped into his heart without either of us noticing. I placed my hand gently over his injured arm. "I do not know what lies ahead, but I am not walking away now." Nathan lowered his forehead to the back of my hand, the gesture soft and unguarded, a surrender in silence. In that fragile moment, every layer of armor he had worn for years cracked open. I knew then that what had happened was not an accident. It was a declaration, a beginning to a confrontation with no room for mercy. And in that spiral, I was already entangled with no way out. I left the estate on a morning wrapped in gray clouds, carrying nothing but my small backpack with my laptop and unfinished files. There was no formal farewell, no promises, no anger, only a folded slip of paper I left behind, scribbled with a few rushed words. "I need time. I am safe. I will contact you." I did not know what exactly I was running from, only that after the construction site attack, I could not continue pretending nothing had changed. This was no longer a technical project, no longer work. I had become a link in a dangerous chain, and I feared I did not have the strength to bear the consequences if something went wrong. I stayed with my closest friend in Brooklyn, in an old student dorm that had been converted into a small sanctuary amid the chaos of the city. For the first few days, I tried to return to my regular scheduled Zoom meetings, community planning files, pending public sector reviews. But one name echoed in my mind relentlessly: Mason. I had not said goodbye to him. I could not. I knew I would crumble if I looked into those eyes, knew I would lose the resolve to walk away. And he, I knew, was waiting. Nathan was a different silence altogether. For 3 days I heard nothing, no calls, no messages, no questions, no anger, no plea. The emptiness unsettled me more than anything. I had expected him to show up, to say something, to assert control the way he always did when things spun beyond his reach. But he did not, and that very restraint made me falter. Meanwhile, at the estate, Mason had grown unnervingly quiet. The staff whispered that he no longer asked his morning questions, no longer wanted to draw or read with anyone. He simply sat by his window, staring toward the front gate where I used to enter every morning. Nathan noticed. He did not ask, did not speak of it, but each night he returned to the surveillance room, replaying old footage, pausing on the moment I held Mason's shoulder as we walked, the moment I laughed when he showed me a crooked drawing, the moment he clung to me the last time I left. Something inside Nathan was beginning to crack. He had always known exactly what he wanted, what he needed, what he must protect, but for the first time, he felt something slipping beyond his control. And what frightened him most was not the attack, not the conspiracy in the shadows, but the empty space I had left behind. One night, after the house had gone silent, he stepped into Mason's room. The boy was still awake, his eyes wide in the dim light. "Dad, where is Miss Emily?" The question was small, but it cut into the deepest, most hidden part of Nathan. He sat on the edge of the bed and placed a hand on his son's back. "She will come back," he murmured, as though reassuring himself more than his child. Mason did not reply. He pulled the blanket up and turned toward the wall. Nathan remained there for a long time, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alone. Not the kind of solitude he had grown used to enduring, but the hollow ache of a man who once held everything securely, now realizing that some things cannot be kept by power or wealth. Some things survive only through presence, through trust, through the fragile human heart. And his heart in that moment trembled because for the first time he feared losing someone irreplaceable. On Monday morning, as I was getting ready to leave my friend's apartment for the architecture office, I received a parcel that made my pulse stutter the moment I touched it. A thick envelope with no return address, only my name printed in bold on the label. Sensing something wrong, I opened it in the elevator. Inside was a printed photograph of Mason sitting on the school bus, his small face pressed against the glass with an innocence that now felt like a knife to the heart, and beside it a folded note written in a slanted, elegant hand. "If Nathan does not surrender control of the West Bay port within 3 days, an accident will happen. Children get lost very easily. This will be our only warning." My fingers tightened around the paper. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. I pulled out my phone and called Nathan, only to reach his voicemail. I tried again, and again. Nothing. A coldness crept slowly up my spine. I turned around and went straight back into the office, my mind racing. The ransom note demanded the surrender of the West Bay port. I knew that location, not because I had worked there, but because I had spent months studying the city's historical industrial layouts for my thesis on urban revitalization. Nathan's security grid relied on modern digital schematics, the ones filed with the city after the 2010 renovation. But I knew something the digital maps didn't show. I pulled up the archived blueprints from the 1,950 seconds, the original structural skeleton of the port. My finger traced the faded white lines until I found it. An old stormwater drainage tunnel that ran directly beneath the main warehouse. During the renovation, it hadn't been destroyed. It had simply been paved over and forgotten. It didn't appear on any security monitor. It had no electronic sensors. It was a ghost tunnel. If Dean was relying on the modern security system to keep people out, he wouldn't know this tunnel existed. But I did. A route of escape, or worse, a route for abducting someone without detection. I sank to the floor, dizzy as the implications unfolded all at once. If Dean had kept these plans, and if he knew Nathan's current security grid had vulnerabilities because of that old design, then getting close to Mason would not be impossible. I grabbed my phone and dialed the personal number of the senior security officer. His voice was tense. "Miss Emily? Thank God. We've been trying to reach you. Nathan needs you immediately." My pulse thudded. "What happened?" He spoke quickly. Mason had been threatened. A written ultimatum was delivered to Nathan's desk that morning. The entire system had shifted into internal lockdown, but a flaw in the data tiering structure stemming from an old blueprint was preventing the rear gate from sealing fully. I froze. It was the blueprint I had sent to Dean. Suddenly everything clicked into place. Dean wanted the West Bay port because controlling that port meant power over the entire eastern supply chain. If Nathan refused, Dean would use Mason to force him to his knees. And I, the one who designed that access route, might be the only person who could stop it. I did not hesitate for even a heartbeat. Mason's face flashed through my mind, the way he had curled into me under the rain, the way his small hands had clung to me at Hope Bridge. I would not let this happen. Not while I could still fight. I sprinted out of the office, called a taxi, and sent Nathan a single message. Do not surrender the port. I know what is happening. I have a way. Outside, the sky rolled with thunder and rain streaked across the windows as if the world itself held its breath before the storm. But this time, I was no longer afraid. This time, I was ready to face Dean Blackwell. Heavy rain did nothing to slow my steps as I reached the Blackwell corporate headquarters. Security barriers were partially closed, guards doubled, and the air felt dense, as if everyone sensed something worse was coming. I ran through the long corridor into the operations room, where Nathan stood rigid, staring at the surveillance feed, replaying the moment Mason was pulled into a black truck near the loading dock. He wore a black shirt, no tie, both hands pressed against the control table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. On another screen was the electronic contract transferring control of the West Bay port. When he turned toward me, his face looked as though it had weathered a hurricane, pain and desperation carved into the lines around his eyes. He took my boy, Emily. He actually did it. I balled my fists and stepped closer. Do not sign. I know you're terrified of losing Mason, but if you sign, we lose everything. Dean will not stop. He does not want a port. He wants you broken. Nathan shook his head, anguish twisting his voice. I have no choice. If we delay even a second, he will hurt him. He reached toward the keyboard, his finger hovering over the authorization key to surrender the port. Don't. I grabbed his wrist, stopping his hand inches from the execution command. He looked at me, eyes hollow and desperate. Emily, let go. There is no other way into that room. It's a fortress. It's a fortress built on secrets. Nathan. And I found one. I pulled my laptop from my bag and slammed it onto the console, overriding the main display. A complex, yellowed schematic filled the screen, a stark contrast to the modern digital grids Dean was watching. Look, I said, pointing to a jagged line running deep beneath the warehouse foundation. I didn't just study your security updates. I pulled the municipal archives from the 1,950 seconds. This is a stormwater drainage tunnel. It was paved over during the expansion, not filled in. It doesn't exist on any modern map, which means Dean doesn't know it's there. Nathan stared at the map, his face pale. The FBI tactical team is 5 minutes out. We wait for them. We don't have 5 minutes. I pointed to the screen where Dean was pacing nervously. If he sees a SWAT team, he'll panic. We need a stealth entry. I can guide you through the old tunnel. It connects to the ventilation room right next to where Mason is held. Nathan looked at me, then at the screen. The fear in his eyes hardened into resolve. He grabbed his coat and a sidearm from the security chief. Show me, but stay behind me. Nathan, you're injured. I am not letting you go into that darkness alone. We go together. The entrance to the old drainage system was hidden behind a rusted storm grate near the seawall, choked by winter weeds and forgotten by time. I used the manual override tool to pry it open, the metal groaning in protest against the wind. We slipped inside, and the heavy darkness swallowed us whole. The air here was different, thick with the smell of salt, rot, and stagnant water. We moved in silence. I took the lead with the flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal damp walls slick with moss and pipes that coiled overhead like sleeping serpents. Behind me, Nathan's breathing was heavy and uneven. I remembered the incident in the basement, his claustrophobia. For a man who controlled a shipping empire, walking into this suffocating stone throat was an act of sheer will. I paused and reached back, squeezing his hand. His grip was iron tight, his palm cold. I'm right here, I whispered. He didn't speak, just nodded, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. He wasn't doing this for himself. He was doing it for Mason. We pressed deeper, the tunnel sloping downward. According to my mental map, we were directly beneath the warehouse foundation. But then, the beam of my light hit a wall of debris. A section of the ceiling had collapsed years ago, leaving a chaotic pile of concrete and twisted rebar blocking the path. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled forward, searching for a way through. Near the top of the pile, there was a jagged, narrow gap barely 18 inches wide, framed by sharp stone teeth. Nathan moved up beside me, shining his light into the hole. He tried to push his shoulder into the opening, but his broad frame caught instantly against the rock. He pulled back, a curse hissing through his teeth, and tried to shift the debris. It didn't budge. It was solid weight, tons of it. He looked at the gap, then at me, and I saw the realization crash into him like a physical blow. He couldn't fit. I have to go on alone, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The ventilation room is just 50 yards past this. I can squeeze through. No. Nathan grabbed my arm, his eyes wild in the half-light. I am not letting you face him alone. We find another way. There is no other way. My voice rose, cracking with urgency. And we don't have time to go back. Mason is right there, Nathan. Just on the other side. He stared at me, the conflict tearing him apart, the instinct to protect me warring with the desperate need to save his son. The seconds ticked by, agonizing and cruel. Finally, he exhaled, a sound of utter defeat and trust. He pulled me to him, his hand cupping the back of my neck, his forehead resting against mine in the dark. "Open the side door," he commanded, his voice rough with emotion. "You get to that control panel. You unlock the south maintenance door, and I will tear through it. Do not engage, Dean. Do not let him see you. Promise me." "I promise." I pulled away before I could lose my nerve. I climbed the pile of debris, the sharp rocks scraping my knees, and forced my body into the narrow gap. The stone pressed against my chest and back, a terrifying embrace. But I pushed through, scraping my skin, inch by agonizing inch, until I tumbled out onto the dusty floor of the other side. I stood up and shone the light back. Through the small hole, I could see Nathan's eyes, watching me a lone sentinel in the dark. I turned off my light to stay hidden, took a shaking breath, and moved silently toward the faint red glow of the ventilation room, alone once more. I slipped into the storage room. Mason was there, tied to a chair, his eyes wide with terror. I pressed a finger to my lips and rushed to him. My hands shook as I worked on the ropes. "It's okay. I'm here," I breathed. I didn't try to run back to the tunnel, it was too small for us both. Instead, I ran to the heavy steel door on the far wall. This was the door Nathan was waiting behind. I ripped the panel cover off and began rewiring the lock, praying my memory of the schematics was right. Suddenly, a voice boomed behind me. "I didn't think you had it in you, architect." I spun around. Dean stood there, a gun in his hand. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Mason. "Step away from the door." I didn't move. I stood between him and the door, shielding the keypad with my body. "It's over, Dean. The police are outside." "Then I guess I need a hostage," he sneered, raising the weapon. My hands, hidden behind my back, trembled as I found the exposed wires of the panel. I didn't need to see them. I knew the schematic. I just needed to short the magnetic circuit. Dean's finger tightened on the trigger. "Time's up." Zap. A spark stung my fingertips, and the heavy hum of the magnetic lock instantly died. The small LED on the panel flickered from red to green. "Now!" I screamed, throwing myself over Mason. Nathan didn't hesitate. He must have been braced against the door, waiting for that silence. The moment the lock disengaged, the heavy steel door didn't explode. It swung open with a violent, metallic shudder as Nathan slammed his entire body weight against it. The timing was perfect. The door hit the wall with a deafening crash, throwing Dean off balance just as he fired. The bullet shattered a light fixture above, raining glass. Before Dean could react, Nathan tackled him, slamming him into the wall with a roar of pure, primal fury. The gun skittered across the floor. I scrambled over to Mason, pulling him into my arms, burying his face in my shoulder, so he wouldn't see the violence of his father defending him. Moments later, the room filled with shouting agents, but I heard none of it. I only felt Mason's heartbeat against mine, and saw Nathan rising from the ground, his chest heaving, his eyes searching frantically until they landed on us. We were out. But the threats still echoed in my bones. This was not over. Dean Blackwell would not stop, and now I understood this would only end when we ended it. Mason had just finished a preliminary medical check when he threw his arms around me and refused to let go. His face streaked with dust and tears, yet his eyes shone with an unbroken trust that nearly brought me to my knees. Nathan stepped forward, the parking garage lights casting pale shadows across his face, and for the first time I noticed the new lines carved into his forehead, the redness around his exhausted eyes. He said nothing at first, simply looked at me for a long moment before kneeling in front of Mason. "Are you all right, son?" His voice was hoarse and trembling. Mason nodded and collapsed into his father's embrace, clinging to Nathan's neck. "I knew you would come, Dad. I knew you and Miss Emily wouldn't leave me." Nathan held him close, those broad shoulders once unshakable in every negotiation, now trembling as if the smallest touch might break him apart. I eased down beside them and wrapped my arms around them both, a wordless circle of warmth in the cold, echoing garage where FBI radios crackled and agents tightened their perimeter. They had been tracking Dean for weeks. But it was the kidnapping, along with the information I provided through the old blueprint, that gave them the leverage they needed. An agent approached Nathan, informing him that Dean Blackwell had just been arrested while attempting to flee the city on a private flight, carrying documents outlining his scheme to take over West Bay Port and years of illicit transactions. Nathan only nodded. When the agent stepped away, he turned to me, his lips pressed tight, as if holding back more than he could bear. I saw the fracture in his eyes, not fear, but the grief of a trust destroyed. Dean had not just been an enemy, he had been family. Nathan placed a hand on my shoulder, his breath heavy. "I'm sorry. For not believing you sooner. For letting it go this far." I shook my head and placed my hand gently on his cheek. "You did everything you could. What matters is that Mason is safe, and that we still have each other." Nathan leaned his forehead against mine, as if the entire world had narrowed to the warmth between our hands. Mason wriggled between us, wrapping his small arms around both our necks. "We're a family now, right?" he whispered. I laughed softly as tears slipped down my face. Nathan pulled us into an even tighter embrace, none of us able to speak, only letting silent tears blend together in a moment of reunion none of us had dared to hope for. In that moment, every fear, every doubt, every exhaustion dissolved. We had lost so much to reach this point, but it was that very loss that taught us the true weight of an embrace, the worth of trust, and the kind of love nothing could replace. When I finally looked up, the rain had eased. The last droplets shimmered on the glass canopy above us, catching the faint morning light. Perhaps dawn was coming, carrying a new beginning, and I knew we would walk into it together. Gentle sunlight fell across the fresh spring grass as white ribbons tied along the fence fluttered in the breeze. Today marked exactly 1 full year since everything changed for me, for Nathan, and for Mason. 1 year since the three of us clung to each other in a cold parking garage with tears and fear and a love too new to name. Now we stood at the opening ceremony of a new park I had spent 12 months designing every path, every bench, every layer of enhanced child safety infrastructure. Hope Haven, a simple name, yet it carried our entire journey. Standing on the small makeshift stage at the center of the lawn, wearing a simple beige dress and holding a microphone that trembled slightly in my hand, I looked out at hundreds of residents, architects, engineers, families, and especially the children waiting to run across the blooming pathways. To my left, Nathan leaned casually against the wooden railing, a soft gray suit making him look more like a man at peace than the guarded figure I first met. He watched me with a warmth he no longer tried to hide. Beside him, Mason, hair tousled from running, held up a handmade sign decorated with stickers he had cut out himself. "My mom built this park." The uneven red marker letters made my throat tighten. I lifted the microphone, steadying my voice. "Today, I'm not standing here only as an architect or designer. I stand here as someone who once lost her way, caught between responsibility and emotion. But this place, and the people gathered here, helped me find what truly matters. That sometimes what we build isn't measured in concrete walls or precise drawings, but in the connections we form, the safety we offer, the trust we nurture." I thanked Nathan for believing in me from the beginning. I thanked Mason for being my endless inspiration, and I thanked my past for giving me a reason to become a better version of myself. When I stepped down, Mason ran to me and wrapped both arms around my waist. "I told everyone you built this, Mom." I laughed through tears, happier than I had ever been. Nathan walked over, placed a hand on my back, and murmured, "I never knew a park could make someone feel this much peace." I looked up at him, and for a moment the world quieted. Then the three of us stepped through the Hope Haven archway together, into laughter and sunlight, believing that all good things begin with a single brave choice. And on that day, in a park built from memory and trust, I knew we had truly become a family. Not perfect, but wholly ours, forever. The late afternoon sun bathed Hope Haven in golden light. Children laughed across the lawns, weaving through the young trees, filling the air with a warmth that felt almost sacred. I sat on a stone bench beside the small pond I had designed in countless sleepless nights, my fingers intertwined with Nathan's, while Mason rode his bicycle in circles around the play area, his helmet tilted to one side. Peace settled over us like something earned. Nathan watched me with that quiet, profound tenderness I had come to know. "You know," he began softly, "I once thought I would spend my whole life behind the cold walls of work controlling everything with logic and numbers. But you and Mason taught me there are things we cannot measure, yet they are the most important of all." Then, unexpectedly, he stood, straightened his collar, and walked up the stone steps to the small plaza where residents had gathered for the weekend concert his team had arranged. I noticed the knowing looks among his staff. They were expecting something. Nathan lifted a hand to quiet the crowd and spoke, his voice warm and deep. Today is special to this community because Hope Haven has become a symbol of safety and hope. But it is also special to me, because I want to say something to a woman who not only builds strong structures, but rebuilt my entire life with her heart. He stepped down, walked toward me, and knelt on one knee beneath the soft spring light. Emily, you entered my life like a quiet wind, gentle, yet strong enough to tear down every wall I ever built. You loved Mason as if he were your own, and you stood beside us through everything. Today, in front of this whole city, I have only one question. Will you marry me? My hand flew to my mouth as tears spilled freely, not from surprise, but because my heart had been waiting for this moment far longer than I dared admit. I nodded, and applause erupted around us, mingling with the delighted shouts of children. Mason rushed forward, throwing his arms around us. Once more, we held each other tightly, but this time in joy, in the promise of a beginning. This story is not only a personal journey, it is a reminder of how healing can bloom from injury, how love can rise from the darkest moments, and how bravery often begins in the quietest corners of the heart. If you are watching this video and this story moved you, we invite you to share your thoughts below. Has there been a moment that changed your life? A time when you had to choose between fear and courage? What does this story remind you of in your own life? Your reflections help us connect not just as storytellers and listeners, but as people realizing we are never alone on the path toward happiness. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it so more people can receive the comfort and hope these stories offer. Every day, we bring heartfelt, meaningful, and inspiring narratives, especially for those who cherish family, love, and kindness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, joy, and gentle peace each day, and the courage to begin again whenever life asks it of you. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.